Welcome back to Plain to Win, and today we have the most incredible writer, and she is one of my favourite journalists. Her words always find a way to land, they're super powerful, and I am beyond excited to have her here today. She is also a senior writer at Stylist. Amy Beecham,
Hi.
welcome to Plain to Win.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is so nice to have you here because I feel like I read your work all the time, I read your work every week, and to actually have the face behind the words, it's just so lovely to have you here.
Thank you, that's very kind of you to say.
No,
I feel all embarrassed. I'm like, oh. Usually I'm kind of obviously behind the screen.
Yes.
And, you know, it's a bit of a weird thing, a lovely weird thing to be in front of a camera.
Embrace it, exactly. So there is so much that I want to talk to you about because there is so much going on in the world, especially when it comes to women. So many things in the news today. So, but first things first, this week, your Substack, which is one of my personal favourites.
Thank you.
You wrote an article about being a gifted and talented child, and when I tell you that you have found a way to articulate how I have felt my entire life, but have never really known what that feeling is, what that niggle is, what that pressure is, and you just found a way to kind of bring it to life for me. So I would love to start there. And, you know, what was your experience, childhood, school? How was that for you?
Yeah, well, welcome to the club of former gifted and talented children who are now adults and feel like they've grown up with kind of a lot of expectation on them, that they're going to be these high flyers, they're going to be somebody, you know. As a child, I was someone that every school report said, she's going places. And that's something that I really internalized in a great way, because I do think that a lot of my ambition has been founded on that kind of, that expectation. But also when I got to adulthood and, you know, life can't be graded in A stars. Life can't be graded in, you know, your teacher saying you're star of the week or you're put on a gifted and talented list. I found it really difficult to kind of know where I stood because I constantly wanted to be ranked or to know kind of where the progress was. So my boss would say, great job. And I'm like, yeah, and what?
Yes.
Like, where's the rest of it? Because I felt so dependent on the kind of praise that you give children when you want to build them up and you want to build their confidence and have this kind of amazing, you're so special, you're so talented. But when that kind of starts to fizzle out as an adult, and if you're someone like me who really built a lot of their identity on those markers of success, you kind of feel like you're in a completely new world because you don't know where you are. You don't know if you're on the right track anymore because things aren't being verbalized, because adults aren't supposed to need that kind of validation.
So true.
And that's why I wrote the Substack, is because I felt like, well, adults aren't supposed to need it, but I need it sometimes. And what does that mean for me? And that's where I kind of came across the term gifted child burnout. And I was like, wow, I'm patient zero.
Yes.
Because that is something that, you know, pressure didn't necessarily come from my parents. My parents have always been so supportive and so encouraging. And it really was like, the world is your oyster, take what you want from it. But I put so much pressure on myself, I think, because I'm an only child and I'm also a child of IVF. So, you know, the way that I grew up was quite different to a lot of other people. So I kind of had this thing in my mind where like, okay, I need to be the best at everything. I need to be top of the class for everything. And for a while I was, and that was so great. And I loved that. And it really kind of was a cycle that was feeding itself of like, you know, the higher I got in GCSEs or in A-levels, the more recognition I got, I'd chase more of it. And then I remember getting to university and I got into a really exclusive course. And that was like, you know, the next thing. And that was amazing. And then I graduated and I didn't get a first. I got 0.4% off of a first, and you can tell, even though that was 7 years ago, that 0.4% still bothers me.
Yeah,
you know, and I shouldn't
totally get it.
But I do, because it was the first time that I was like, oh, I'm not the best at everything. And, you know, that's a really important lesson to learn. Ultimately, I do feel grateful for having learnt it, but it really kind of felt like I've been on this upwards trajectory for my whole life. And, you know, on what was the biggest stage at the time, I fell. And that really kind of changed my mindset in terms of realizing that I might try really, really hard. I might put myself in all the right rooms, and I might, you know, do everything that they say that you should do in order to be successful. But sometimes the luck of the draw doesn't go that way. So yeah, it's been a very interesting kind of journey for me. I think I was the first in my family to go to university. You know, journalism is quite a connected industry, but
Yes.
I didn't have any connections. Like, my mum's a window cleaner and she's a fantastic one, but like, you know, I'm not getting internships off of like aunties and godparents and whatever. So I feel like everything that I've done in my career, I've done out like off my own steam. And that's something that I feel really proud of. But yeah, it has meant that I've had to work really, really hard to push past kind of, you know, rejections and perceived failures, because that's what it is, right? I think when I'm writing the Substack, I'm very conscious that when I talk about feeling like I'm not good enough, you might look at my career and think, you're doing so much, how could you ever feel like that? And I get that totally. Like, I say to myself, how can I feel like that? But that doesn't change the fact that I still feel like I'm not doing enough. It's my standard, right?
Yes.
You know, to you, you might think, well, what more could you want from life? Because you've won awards, you're doing all of these amazing things. And I know, but there's something in me that tells me you should have done more than that. And that's what I'm kind of always trying to interrogate and investigate in my newsletter specifically, is why do we feel like we're never doing enough?
Yeah.
Even when the rest of the world is pointing to the fact that we're probably doing too much.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what I can totally relate to that on so many different levels. And I was exactly the same, had exactly very similar experience to you. And I actually really remember someone very close to the family when we were growing up said to my parents, she will peak too early. And this was at 7 years old, very similar to you.
Yeah.
She's going to Oxford.
Yeah.
And then seemingly not going to Oxford and very much almost reaching a point of scraping by, and that real feeling of I'm a failure because the academic system, the education system that we've grown up in has trained me to think that unless I do not get an A star, I have failed. And because that's what we were always praised for, was you're the top of the class.
Yeah.
You are so clever. You are so much cleverer than everyone else. And even the language around like gifted and talented, what that then does for the people who aren't in those rooms is like, you are not born with anything that is a natural ability, because we're the ones that were born with the gifts and the talents. So then actually it's not helpful for anyone, because then we are then put into the real world and it's like, you're not what you've been told you are by the school system. And then really having to internalize that and go, how do I cope when I don't do 110%? Because you're never going to be able to do 110%. And I feel like there's so much in that around our own ability. When do you think that really started for you, that kind of realization of, okay, was it that university moment of I didn't get a first? When did you really feel that shift?
I mean, some days I don't feel the shift at all. I'm still, you know, I try to work through my feelings of comparison. I really try to, you know, look at things a different way. But of course, on our worst days, I'm always going to say, why is this not happening for me? Or I try so hard, why am I not being rewarded in the way that I feel like I should? And I think it comes from not a sense of entitlement, but I think the kind of girl boss platitudes and Bible that so many of us grew up on told us that if we worked hard enough, if we wanted it enough, if we kind of dared to dream and pulled up a seat at the table and, you know, kind of broke the mold and really like were confident and bolshy about what we wanted, we would be rewarded for that.
Yeah.
But what I found was that, you know, the world doesn't always reward that. And sometimes it's luck, and sometimes it's knowing the right people, and sometimes it's just something else. But I think that, you know, I felt entitled, not because I thought the world owed me anything, but because I felt like I'd worked for it. Like I felt like I'd done everything right. I'd been, you know, writing on the internet since I was far too young. I'd been, you know, doing unpaid internships and writing for websites where I bared my soul and millions of people read it when I was like 16, 17 years old. Like I did everything that I thought that I should. And then when I graduated, I, you know, kind of expected that to be reflected back to me. Like, you know, I've been working for it, so like, where is it kind of thing? And that didn't happen. Obviously, I, you know, in the grand scheme of things, I did get my job at Stylist pretty quickly. I basically, I was freelancing for a little while and I went for a job interview at Stylist and got on really well with everyone, but I didn't end up getting the role. So that was in 2020, just before the pandemic. And that was crushing because I have just always loved the brand and I knew that I wanted to work there. But I really kind of kept in touch and would be like, oh, if you need holiday cover, if you know, again, this typical like, don't take no for an answer, be persistent, be bold kind of
Always
rhetoric.
do the most.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, it did work, to be fair.
Yeah.
So I ended up kind of doing little bits of holiday cover and freelance shifts. And then I did that for a year until I got my full-time job, which I've been doing for 4 years now. So, okay, you know, from graduating to a full-time job, we're talking about a nearly 2-year time frame. And that's not, you know, I'm not saying that I was hustling and grinding for years with to no avail. But I do think that, yeah, the university experience for me, it was very small. There were 25 people on my course. I did creative writing. And so it was a very kind of collaborative environment. But I do remember on one of our first days, one of the tutors saying, look around the room. These are the people that you're going to be fighting for agents. These are the people that you're going to be fighting for book deals and publishers. These are the people that you're going to be kind of up against. And that was quite an intense experience.
What a dynamic to create to young undergraduates.
Yeah. And it did feed into my psyche for quite a while, and I had to really unpick that. And I think one of the great parts about the work I do now and being a journalist is that there are always incredible people doing incredible things. And I do think that while it sounds counterintuitive, the more time you spend around very talented people, the more okay you get with your own condition, because, you know, it took a while, but now I see, you know, I see my colleagues, I see other people in the industry, and I'm like, that is so incredible what they're doing. And, you know, just because it's happening for them doesn't mean it won't happen for me, or maybe it'll happen for me in a different way. And I think that kind of the gifted and talented into the, you know, a world where gifted and talented when you're kind of, okay, a couple in a class versus everyone that I work with is gifted and talented, you know, that has been a really great kind of learning curve for me of being like, okay, you're not special, but you are special. And it's always this kind of, this balance of not having too much of an ego and not being too, you know, that Jemima Kirk, like, I think we're thinking about ourselves too much.
Yes.
Not being too, you know, self-serving in that sense, but also being like, hey, I have a really cool job and I get to do some really cool stuff and I'm really good at it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, there's a constant battle inside me, which is like the imposter syndrome and the ego.
Yes.
Because I both think that I'm terrible at my job and absolutely fantastic at my job.
Oh my
and
God.
It just depends on the hour or the minute or the day. If you ask me, you know, do you think you're a good journalist? Sometimes I think that I'm great. And sometimes I'm like, oh God, no, like I could be doing so much more.
Yes, absolutely. And I think as well, when we're especially coming up through the education system in the way we have, it is very much about comparison.
Yes.
And for every child in the traditional system, it is always about comparison. You are constantly compared to everyone else around you. And actually, that reframe that you've had going from comparison to collaboration is actually where you've managed to find a little bit of peace.
Yeah.
And I think you are special, but just not for the reasons that the education system limited you to.
Yes.
Like, you're special for so many reasons, not just your intelligence. Whereas in a education environment, that's all we're graded on. We're not graded on our empathy or our social skills or any of the other things that make really special people who can then go on and have careers like you've had. And the reason why you've got your job at Stylist, from the story that you've just told, it doesn't feel like that was necessarily about your academic ability. That was about you as a human. And I think there's a real unpicking that, especially we all have to do when we come out the education system, but especially kind of that overachieving personality of, okay, I am allowed to be fully seen for who I am, not just the fact that I was the top of my class, because that's what I've always been.
And those markers don't mean anything when you reach a certain age. Like, you know, it's like being the popular kid at school. I was not the popular kid at school, and I thought that that was going to follow me my entire life of like, people are going to know that, like, I didn't have the cool house parties, and like, you know, 10 people didn't ask me to prom, but like you do realize that while that feels like the center of your universe then, and that's the only markers, you know, we have so little to grade ourselves on in terms of identities, because, you know, we think, you know, if you'd asked 14, 15-year-old me to describe myself, I'd be like, I'm good at English.
Yes.
I'm good at this. I'm in the school play. I'm the lead in the school play, whatever.
Yes, yep.
Because we have so few kind of identity markers to cling to.
That makes so much sense.
Whereas when you get older and you naturally just have more life experiences, it's like, okay, I'm a great friend. I'm a good wife, I hope, to my husband.
Yeah.
I'm a good daughter.
I'm kind.
I'm really funny. I'm great at karaoke, not really, but like I'll give it a go. I feel like I'm good in conversations at like, seeing who's not being asked questions and making sure I kind of pivot to that. And there are so many things that I could list before I say I'm good at my job.
Yes. And I think it's actually really reductive what we do to children in the education system, because when you enter a world where no one cares about your GCSEs, and that's like all your A-levels, all your university degree. When I think about my own career, and I'm sure you're the same, no one has ever asked me those questions ever. And we've been taught and conditioned that that's your value.
Yeah.
So when no one asks you, it's not even that fear of rejection, it's that fear of invisibility.
Yeah, what did I do all of that for?
Why my entire identity has been wrapped up in my intelligence, and now no one actually gives a shit.
Yeah.
So who am I now?
Yeah.
And it's just that real thing of having to find yourself all over again based on kind of attributes that you thought were you, and they weren't. It's just something that you were good at. They weren't actually who you are.
Yeah.
But what was it about Stylist then that made you kind of gravitate towards them after you've gone through this kind of shift? Did you feel like it just you just gravitated towards it because of what you were kind of going through? I feel like Stylist is always very raw, very kind of deals with the topics that no one else really wants to touch.
Yeah, I think for me, the best thing about working there, it's the breadth of story that I get to work on. So there could be a feature on, the rabbit hole of misogyny and how otherwise moderate men who, might say that they're a feminist or might be really respectful towards women will say things like, well, Andrew Tate's got a few good opinions on, things like finance or whatever shit he's talking about.
Yeah.
How they're kind of being sucked into the rabbit hole of misogyny because we associate inceldom with, men in their basements with dark hoods on behind a laptop. Like, that's not what incels and misogynists look like. We're dating them, we're married to them, they're our parents, they're our children, So we can have a feature on that's directly next to something on, the best ballet flats to wear.
That breadth of women don't just have to fit in a box. And I think this is where feminism has kind of just created all of these false narratives and false stereotypes of, if you're a feminist, you are not allowed to like makeup, be interested in fashion. And I think those parts of women's culture are so important because everything else that we deal with is really fucking heavy.
Yeah.
And actually, when you become kind of, as women so often are now, this kind of like ethical cleanup crew, if you like, of not only are we the face of it, but we also have to fix it.
Yeah.
Like, that's really heavy. And our nervous systems are like in high alert, hyper vigilant all the time. And actually having that space to enjoy things for fun, for joy, not because we're trying to change the world, not because we're trying to make the world a better place for our kids, not because we're, just because we want to have some joy. That is so important for women's mental health, their well-being. And I think sometimes it's really difficult to feel like, oh, but I'm talking about really serious things and I'm trying to move the needle, but then people just don't take me seriously if I'm then talking about skincare.
Yeah.
And actually both can go hand in hand. Women can be multifaceted. We are multifaceted. When you first started writing for Stylist, did you already have in your head, like, this is the kind of identity that I want to have as a writer, or am I just going to figure it out, feel it out? I want to write the hard-hitting stuff.
Yeah.
Like, what was that process like for you in finding your identity in your career?
So I actually started, my first ever role was as digital writer, and I used to do the morning shift. So I would start work at 6 a.m. and work until 2 p.m. and I was the only person on the website.
Right,
so
okay.
I would pick my own stories, I would write my own stories, I would choose the pictures, I would sub-edit it, I would publish it, and everyone else would kind of log on at 9:30 and see the sort of 3 or 4 stories I'd done for the day. And, working in 2020 and 2021, obviously there was, violence against women, unfortunately, prevalent at all times,
Yeah.
but it was really kind of being talked about in a totally different way in the wake of Sarah
Sarah
Everard's
Everard,
murder,
yeah.
and, you know, moving on to kind of Zara Alina and
Yeah.
so many people like that. And those experiences were really starting conversations. So I started off, just because that's what the news cycle was demanding, was, you know, reporting on a lot of violence against women. And I think as I've kind of grown as a writer, I've really increased my confidence in being able to tell personal stories. So something that was a big highlight for me a couple of years ago is I interviewed one of the first ever drink spiking victims when they were being spiked by injection. There was kind of a bit of a phase a couple of years ago, around sort of 2022, where there had been a huge increase in drink spiking, but not just kind of the traditional, like slipping something in someone's drink, also being spiked by injection on a night out. And I did an exclusive interview with a young woman who had experienced that. And that to me was a real turning point in terms of combining my voice as a journalist with the very real issues that are happening, because I think so much of what I was doing was sort of secondhand reporting. And obviously, you know, there's a horrible new report out that says this amount of women have experienced stalking, or there's, you know, data from a charity that says calls to domestic violence helplines have increased tenfold. But that was the first time that I felt like I was doing journalism, because I found, you know, she actually messaged me on Instagram because she said that she'd been reading my work and she wanted to tell her story to me. So that kind of really kicked off, I think, a slightly different momentum for me. It could be something political, it could be something relationships or friendship based, could be mental health, it could be politics, it could be something more investigative. So, you know, there's a real balance where, okay, some of my articles might be really hard hitting interviews with, like I say, this person who'd been spiked, or I did a feature on online misogyny where I actually interviewed the founder of a really big incel platform and kind of asked him,
I've read this.
What he was on about.
Yes,
and that
I've
was
read
really
this. Oh my God,
fascinating.
yes.
Because again, I think that that's such an interesting angle to take on it, is to ask men why. Because we, you know, as women, we are the victims of misogyny. But for me, I thought, you know, how can I, obviously not wanting to platform hateful opinions, but also what can we learn from asking these people why they think Andrew Tate is so inspirational? And it was really eye-opening. You know, obviously we had to do a lot of safeguarding around that, and I'm really lucky to have editors that take my safety very seriously. So that was done in a very controlled kind of environment. But in that piece, so I spoke to someone who identifies as an incel and runs a very popular Twitter X account dedicated to kind of men's rights and that kind of thing. I also spoke to a woman whose boyfriend had been kind of sucked into those kinds of narratives, and most interestingly, a woman who identified with those kinds of narratives. So a woman who was a fan of Andrew Tate and his, which, if you can believe, there are a growing number. So yeah, I think the best part of the job is certainly that I get to explore some really deep topics, but in, you know, it feels wrong to say exciting, because of course nothing about women being harmed is exciting, but I think that there's a lot of,
in a really powerful way.
And in a way that feels different, a way that feels a bit fresh, and it feels like something that I can really put my stamp on and say, you know, I want to be the person telling these stories.
And these stories that have impact and make so much difference in the world, they're the stories that need to be told. And that sounds like absolutely where your head is when you're approaching your writing. And what is it for you when you sit down to think, right, I'm going to write a story? What makes a good story for you? What are there specific things that you're looking for in that process?
So recently I wrote something about feeling like I have this endless to-do list of things I want to achieve before I have a child and kind of feeling burnt out by this ambition fatigue of, right, so if I want to have a baby in this many years, then I've got to scale back and start doing
Which,
this.
can I say, is like an inner monologue for probably every single woman, especially millennial women. Like, I can totally resonate to that. And I also did read that piece as well. And it was very, very good. Highly recommend to anyone listening to go and read that piece because it's so brilliantly articulated. But yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but that's what you do so well. It's that tapping into that inner monologue that someone else has got in their head. And yeah, like you said, the ambition fatigue.
And so much of, you know, the way that we source those kinds of features are through conversations with our friends, are through conversations with each other. Like, some of our most powerful covers that I haven't been involved in, you know, have come from conversations we've had in the office. So, for example, the Weight on Our Mind cover, which we did a couple of years ago, where we had like 100 pictures of women kind of from behind, where we were talking about how we're not supposed to think about our weight anymore because we're supposed to be past that, and it's anti-feminist to worry about losing weight or what we look like. And, you know, when we started, or when they started having that conversation in the office, it was like, okay, everyone's a bit scared to admit that we do think about our figures and our bodies more than we want to. And that was something that we transformed into something super powerful. So even though that wasn't kind of my work, I think it's always setting a great example. And to bring it back to the girls cover, that was done by my incredible colleague Holly. That was, again, from conversations of like, God, like, do you remember how bad it was being a schoolgirl? And, you know, is it worse for them now? Like, we thought that things were supposed to be getting better and that surely things aren't as bad as when we were at school. But actually, from what we found, or what Holly found, that, you know, it's so much worse in other ways. And that's always a great compliment, I think, when people say, you read my mind.
Yes.
Or that's exactly what I was thinking, but I didn't know how to verbalize it. Like, that is probably the greatest compliment that I could receive for the type of writing that I do, is for someone to feel like I've unlocked or unpicked something that's been sitting with them for a really long time, but they didn't know how to do themselves.
It's that thing about just wanting to be seen and understood and validated in how you're feeling. And I think there is so much that you just said that I just would love to pick out a little bit more in terms of, yes, we all think about our weight all the time, everywhere we go. And it does feel anti-feminist to say that I want to be a certain size or I want to lose weight. Like, it's actually uncomfortable to say those words out loud as a woke feminist woman in 2025. But it is so true. Like, we all do care about the way we look, and rightly or wrongly, we now feel like that's a huge part of our identity, that we're actually, it just feels like it's a patriarchal thing that's been created in terms of censorship.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I'm going to land with this, but I just feel like there's something there around, are we not all just trapping ourselves again by saying, you can't do this, you can't do that? And it just feels like it's just like another regurgitation of women being oppressed in what they can and can't do, say, think. And as well, kids today couldn't pay me enough to be a teenage girl. I feel so deeply for them, and also so deeply grateful that I am not a schoolgirl now, but also so deeply worried about the future for my own daughter, because we always, who is only 2, so I'm definitely ahead of where I should be in terms of that, but you can't help but think that in terms of like, if we're supposed to be evolving and getting better with every generation that comes, and when we look at, like you said, misogyny, the manosphere, what it's like to be a teenage girl now for a variety of different reasons, where is the progress and when do we see that progress? And that's something that is really difficult as a woman today who cares and wants to make a difference. And I think what Stylist, exactly what you've just said, those stories and these conversations come from women coming together, not women competing. In terms of the way that the media represents women, and outside of Stylist, outside of our lovely echo chamber that we have, in terms of Amy Lou Wood and Millie Bobby Brown, we're starting to see this real external shift, because women have been abused by the press for as long as we can remember. Like, especially our generation in the 90s and noughties, witnessing Britney,
Paris
and
Lindsay,
Lindsay, like seeing what the media have done to women, and even people closer to home in terms of like Lily Allen, people like that who the media have just absolutely destroyed as women. And now I feel like we're at a place where we've empowered women through women's media, through the female awakening that feels like it's really starting to come to the surface now, where we're saying, we've had enough of this shit. That's it now. We're going to stand up and say this is wrong. Where do you stand in terms of finding a place where you're writing these really powerful stories and we're empowering and lifting women up and giving them that space to criticize the press whilst also being part of the press? Like, it's such a difficult space to land. How do you find that?
I think my initial response to that would be there's a very big difference between critiquing women, which is okay. You know, sometimes women do bad things. And tearing them down for their appearance or their behaviours, as long as those behaviours aren't, you know, like criminal or toxic. So I think that while it's very okay to interrogate women, men, anyone, I think it's very specifically aimed at women, this kind of very surface, superficial tearing down of appearance, tearing down of kind of, you know, very normal behaviours. And that's where I think the misogyny seeps through. I do think that social media has changed the authority that we feel we have on famous people, particularly famous women. And I don't personally agree with the idea that just because someone is a celebrity that they've opened themselves up to unlimited criticism. You know, you hear it a lot with, not that I'm personally fans of theirs, but the Kardashians, this whole you've put yourself in the public eye, you've got a reality TV show, therefore you shouldn't be upset about anything that comes your way. And I don't think that that's strictly true. I think that...
I don't think it's fair either.
No, I don't think so.
It's not very just in terms of you've got a career, this is your career. Even and when we apply it to our own lives, our own careers, just because you might have a career in media or I might have a career doing everything that I'm doing, that doesn't open me up for abuse. Regardless of what that is. I think that's like a really important...
I just think that we've kind of... We like to think that so much has changed because we don't have such an obvious tearing down of women's appearances. We don't have the kind of red circle of shame that we had in the tabloids of people's cellulite and belly rolls, and, you know, we don't have those kind of before and after, you know, when you take a picture of a famous woman on a beach in a bikini and then 6 weeks later they'd have a fitness video. I think we've kind of tricked ourselves into thinking that because we're not doing it that overtly anymore, that we've somehow made incredible progress. But I do think that the ways that we are responding to women and the ways that we are more subtly tearing them down, I think that's still very prevalent in a lot of senses, whether that's on social media, whether that's in, you know, traditional media as well. I think that we should always be able to criticize people and to hold celebrities to account. But it does feel unfair, the focus that is on women's appearances and women's behaviours. So, for example, I'm not a personally, you know, I don't really care about Meghan Markle on a personal level. However, I do think that the way that she is villainised for having a nice house, having some cute kids and marrying a prince, like, the woman cannot do anything right. And if you were criticising the monarchy and that as an institution and, you know, or her activism or something like that, something with a bit of substance, I think that that is a totally different ballgame to hating her for the sake of hating her. Or hating her because of your internal racism. And you don't even know that that's why you hate her. You just say, oh, there's something about her that I don't like. Okay. Let's name what it is that you don't like about her. Because you don't know anything about her.
Yes,
and I just think that women almost have to prove themselves as good characters.
We have to be likeable to be successful.
Whereas when it comes to men in the public eye, they have so many chances to screw up, and you so rarely see a man being mocked for aging or a man's appearance being torn apart. The only example that I can think of off the top of my head would be people mocking Barry Keoghan.
Yes, yeah.
I never know how to pronounce his name. Mocking his appearance, but that's literally, and that is obviously terrible. Totally condemn that. But that is one person in however many that I can think of that would be scrutinized in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like Amy Lou Wood this week, like with the SNL sketch, like what the fuck was that? Like when we think about progress, exactly like you said, what the hell? Like what I find so difficult to digest in that scenario especially is, at what point did everyone think that that was okay?
Yeah.
Like at what point? That's how easy it is. That's how how misogynistic behaviors and values are so prevalent that we don't even realize, because how many people would that have had to go through to get to where it did? And for then a young woman, a very successful young woman, to then feel how she feels and have to feel humiliated, not because she's done anything wrong, not because she said something, not because her acting has made her feel silly or look silly in some kind of way, because of the way she looks. What the hell? Like and I think that's, like you said, that is the difference between the way the media represents women and the way that the media represents men. And Meghan Markle, completely agree. I'm actually completely neutral on her. I really don't feel strongly either way. But Catherine Ryan spoke about this recently, and I think she did a little thing saying how she didn't like the new Netflix series and she wasn't a big fan of Meghan Markle. And she said herself she regrets saying it, not because she doesn't believe it, but because what then happened after that was the pile on Meghan Markle, because she said something that was quite quite objective. It wasn't nasty, it wasn't harmful, it was just her opinion. And how it then got twisted by the Daily Mail, social media, to become this massive pile on, like you said, a woman who's got a nice house, married prince, had some kids, and like, why do we all care so much? I still don't get it. And what I find troubling as well is that a lot of the shame on Meghan Markle, a lot of the abuse, a lot of the opinions come from other women. Which is really difficult to swallow as well, because I think that's a huge issue in the female community, is how we treat each other, massively. And why do you think that is? Why are we so hard on each other? Because I don't actually, apart from the obvious, Piers Morgans and the like, in day-to-day life, I don't have conversations with any men who sit around saying, I hate Meghan Markle, she's this, this and this. But if I have a conversation with another woman, she's like, oh, I really dislike her, blah, blah, blah. Like, why does she make us so uncomfortable as women?
I think that is, quite indicative of, not to get too kind of deep with it, when we're fighting against each other and policing each other's behaviour, the patriarchal society that we live in and exist in doesn't have to do it. Like, we are being agents of the patriarchy by monitoring one another. We're doing their job for them. So I think that it is just, it can sound like quite a platitude to say internalized misogyny to answer every question that you've asked me today. But I do think that that is something that we really could not be more, need to be more aware of and can't ever be too aware of, is how it distracts us when we're fighting with each other about something as stupid as
Meghan
a
Markle
Netflix show or whatever, or cutting up a platter of fruit for her kids. Not behind our backs, because so many of us are acutely aware of it. Our reproductive rights are being rolled back. And, women and children are being disproportionately affected by conflict and war. And I think that it's really telling that we would spend so much of our time getting into a tizzy over someone we don't know. And,
Distraction,
you know,
isn't
it is distraction.
Yeah.
Because it stops us from being a collective, and that's where the power is.
Yeah, moving the needle in the right direction.
Yeah.
100%. And I think so timely is on exactly this topic is the Blue Origin flight.
Yes.
Where are we at with that, Amy? Tell me I know how I feel. I
Okay.
think I know how I feel about it. I think I've landed. Not 100% sure. It's not a clean stream of consciousness yet, but where are you at with it?
So, I think that among the furore of Katy Perry in space and this is so great for women, I think we've forgotten that there was one woman on that flight who has dedicated a significant portion of her life to being an astronaut.
Yeah.
So Amanda, I think it's Nuygen.
I don't know how to say her surname
Nuygen, I
either.
apologise for the pronunciation. We actually interviewed her. She was the first, I believe, the first Southeast Asian woman in space. And I think that among the kind of celebrity and the gimmick of it, you know, a lot of the criticism has rightfully been, why the hell are we sending celebrities up to space for 11 minutes? What a waste of money, what a waste of kind of environmental resource.
Distraction again, right?
Yeah.
It's a distraction.
But I think that, you know, I feel personally quite sorry for her for having a really big feat overridden by the kind of spectacle of it. And I think my opinion is we put so much attention on sending those women to space when female astronauts at NASA are having their contracts cut and diversity and inclusion is being rolled back on a huge scale in the US. And I think that it's a real shame that sometimes we only care about things when there's a familiar face attached.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I don't think that it raised the awareness that they thought it would. I don't think that it was the kind of feminist landmark that they thought it, or they liked to say that it was. I don't think there's anything feminist about it at all.
No, I completely agree.
And I think just like women doing stuff is not inherently feminist.
Absolutely.
There has to be something backing it up. Like if you are saying, okay, we're going to sponsor a breakthrough program of women in STEM, women in kind of the space agency, then it would be a bit different, but it's not.
No.
It's just billionaires trying to flex their wealth and, you know, they've had enough of playing around on Earth and now they're going to try and colonize space.
And I feel like I completely agree with you, and that's exactly where I've landed with it. Katy Perry, as an example, and when we talk about critiquing other women, I feel like she should have done better at giving that platform to people like Amanda. Using that moment, if she wants to be part of it, for whatever reason, I think we know why, she could have given her platform and made it something better than what it was. And when we talk about, the reason why I'm so reluctant having this conversation and feel uncomfortable talking about it is because I don't want to talk negatively about other women, because exactly like you said, we're just doing the patriarchy's work for them, but equally we have to hold each other accountable because it's our community and we have to hold each other, just like we expect men to hold each other accountable. We have to do the same thing. And I just really feel like her behaviour did more for making women seem silly than it did anything else.
Yeah.
Because holding her freaking set tour list up while she was up in, like, what? Really, you're telling me you're doing this because this is a feminist movement and you really care about the rights of women?
Yeah.
That's the sticking point for me, I think, is that I agree with absolutely everything you said. It's not feminist. It was not a good representation. But someone like Amanda, I don't know how to pronounce her name either, and I feel really bad. But Amanda, she is the representation. She is what we need to see more of. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But she was completely overshadowed and silenced by a PR stunt. And that's essentially all it was. And it feels like it's a Bezos versus Musk competition, and this is how he did it. And that's why it hasn't landed, because it was never done with the right intentions.
No.
It was a corporate billionaire stunt.
Yeah.
That he doesn't
they
actually
thought that
give
they
a
could
shit.
get away with, I think, by making it women.
Yes.
Because if they'd have just sent a load of tech bros up, they would have opened themselves up to so much rightful criticism.
Yeah.
But they were like, do you know what will get us out of jail free? If we say it's for the women.
It's just like, and the other thing that I now also think is, what they've now done is like create this portal almost for, right, as an example, which brand is now going to be the first one to do an influencer trip to space?
Oh,
do you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, I feel like it's opened this like really silly and like completely bizarre way to make money.
Yeah.
Because that's what it felt like. It was a money-making stunt. And Emily Ratajkowski's been really vocal about this, hasn't she? In terms of, these men are literally destroying the planet single-handedly. Single-handedly. And they also have the solution to fix everything single-handedly, because they have the majority of the world's resources right at their fingertips. So if you really want to help women, why are we putting celebrity burning up the ozone layer, sending these random women, apart from the people who should have been on that flight and should have been on the front pages and should have been the ones that we're celebrating right now, for what? Today's episode of Playing to Win is brought to you by the real MVP of life's messiest moments, Here We Flow. Because babe, if you're still using toxic, plasticky period products, what are you even doing? Here We Flow was started by two besties in a bathroom. One was totally over the patriarchy. The other just wanted an organic tampon that she didn't have to import from Mars. And now they've revolutionised the game with fiercely natural period care. We're talking 100% organic plant-based tampons and bamboo pads, period pants that feel like a hug for your vagina, and packaging that actually won't outlive us all.
Your vagina, not your face.
Oh, and if you've ever done that sneeze, you know the one. They've got a brand new sensitive bladder range to keep things cute. Plus, their EXO by Flow condoms just landed in Tesco, sustainable and ultra sensational, so your love life can be just as clean and green as your period. Here We Flow is tackling the stigma and breaking the taboos around female health. No more shame or awkward whispers, just confidence, empowerment, and the freedom to take up space. Plus, they're a certified B Corp, meaning they put people and planet before profit. A brand with a backbone, we love to see it. So grab Here We Flow at Tesco, Sainsbury's, Whole Foods, or online at hereweflow.co, because owning your flow is the real flex. Guys, don't judge me, I'm in my luteal phase.
While ignorance is not an excuse, there is something to be said for like being open to having your mind changed. And I think there's a lot said about what's the right way to be a feminist, but I think it's more important to talk about the wrong ways to be a feminist. And the wrong way to be a feminist is for your feminism not to include all women, and to have a very narrow view of who feminism serves and who it's for and who it's protecting. I think that there is so much that we need to be more vocal on in terms of the rights of trans people and people of colour. My brilliant friend and colleague Shaheda Zaidi has a book coming out this summer called The Othered Woman, which is all about how white feminism harms Muslim women by kind of turning into saviours and really imparting our views of what they should and should do, what they should and should be comfortable with on them.
That is such an interesting topic.
Yeah.
And it's really uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable, of course.
Which is why
that's
it needs
the point,
to be,
right?
Completely. As two white women sat here, we should feel uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Like, completely agree. That's
so
so
I think
interesting.
that it's all about, listening to other people, which is so simple. And again, I don't want to sound reductive by being like, just listen to a diverse range of voices. But sometimes that is where it starts.
Yeah,
and I think, again, everything I say, I really feel in two minds about, because platform diverse voices, again, we hear this time and time again, but also it's true. Like, it's such a thorny thing, I think, to contemplate and to sit with. but it is ultimately our responsibility to know more and to be better and to be inclusive, another word that, you know, gets overused. I think we're in a quieter stage of feminism now. I think we were talking about it the other day, actually, in my friendship group. Do you remember that era in sort of 2013, 2014, when everyone was wearing those T-shirts that said, "This is what a feminist looks like." And it was so performative.
Yeah.
But when you take away the kind of women's march with the vagina hats and, you know, hands off our human rights and that very kind of palatable sense of feminism, what are you left with? And if you're not left with much, then you need to interrogate what that actually means for you, because there is so much more than like a tote bag feminism, and
completely,
you know, showing up in so many different ways. Like if you care about abortion but you don't care about Palestinian women,
yes,
you there's a disconnect there. You
Absolutely.
can't only care about a certain group.
And I think as well, a lot of women, especially ones that I speak to, are so disenchanted with feminism. They don't want to call themselves feminist. And maybe that's just the people that I have conversations with and am surrounded with. But there's a lot of resistance from women to say, but I am a feminist. All being a feminist is that you agree with equality and equity. Like that's like there's almost been this, and again, it's the patriarchy's way of making feminism less attractive, I guess, less palatable to women. But a lot of women I know really struggle with the term feminist.
That's really interesting.
It's really interesting, and I don't know if it's because the portrayal has been that we're angry, lesbian men haters, which is not true at all. To be a feminist is to love men and to care about men. And I think that's part of it, that they maybe think, but I've got a son and I've, that even more reason to be a feminist, because that's your future generation. And I had this conversation recently with another guest around how the patriarchy hurts men just as much, just in very different ways. So when we talk about feminism, it's not about this, you know, portrayal that we've been fed. It's literally just about caring for other people. That's how I've always felt about it. It's that you just care about the injustices, whatever that injustice is, whether it is Palestinian women, whether it is reproductive rights, whether it is misogyny and male suicide rates. It's all of those things. And I think that the label has maybe been, over the years, manipulated into something that it's not. And maybe that is a patriarchal force at work.
Like so many things, whether it's Black Lives Matter or feminism, it goes through trends and waves where everyone's happy to be publicly in this one group,
because it's like a buzz point of the moment, right? Like,
and maybe you feel afraid not to be a feminist. But I think it's very interesting, particularly with a second Trump presidency, a lot of people who were very vocal first time round about how harmful this is for so many people, but women in particular, there's not the same vim, there's not the same momentum. And I just find that incredibly interesting. And I think that ultimately when we do look to celebrities for allyship, I think we're looking in the wrong place. I think we need to look among one another, because, you know, Katy Perry might write songs about girl power, but she's not the feminist icon that I want anyway. She might be someone else's, but I don't think that she's...
Completely. And I think that we can be okay with saying those things out loud.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's kind of where my rambling thoughts have kind of gone with this, in terms of, I agree 100%. And I think we put celebrities on such a pedestal. And then when it comes to, like, Katy Perry is famous because she's a singer, songwriter, entertainer. She's not famous because she's it's really hard to find the words to say it in a way that doesn't feel disparaging to another woman. But she's not the feminist icon that I think she thinks she is. Does that, like, even watching her interviews following the Blue Origin
it's a brand,
thing,
isn't it?
it's a brand.
For some people.
Completely.
And that's where you can, I think, tell the difference, is when that's part of your brand but not part of your identity and part of your value system. Because, you know, corporate feminism is such a huge thing. And I've written before about the ways that kind of things like International Women's Day have been co-opted by, like, Shein selling, like, T-shirts that are made by women and children in sweatshop conditions. You know, so that you can wear something that says "I love women" on it. I do think there's a lot of contradictions going on, and I don't have the answers, and I don't think anyone particularly has the answers. But I think the interrogation of the motives and the meanings behind things, I think that that's a really good place to start if you do feel like you don't really know how to feel.
How can we encourage more women to take it more seriously? And when I say that, it's a sense of Trump's presidency, for me, is, I literally, and this is coming from someone who is in a same-sex relationship, my daughter is born from IVF, we are in a marginalised community in that sense, and his policies directly impact women, children, men who live in the United States who are in the LGBTQ community. So that's, I have a personal connection to it, right? But also, I cried when he got in again, because I was so overwhelmed with sadness that so many people in the wealthiest superpower on this planet believe that it's acceptable for someone like that to have the greatest seat of power in the world. But for a lot of people, they don't care.
No. If you have the luxury not to think about things, like, that's great for you, but the rest of us are out here petrified of, you know, what's going to happen to us, what's going to happen to our families, what's going to happen to people that we care about, what's going to happen to the world in general.
That's exactly it. And I wonder if it is about almost meeting people where they are instead of, and this is from my own experience, of trying to make people around me wider than that understand the real issues that are going on here, what a dangerous place it is for women, and how much still needs to be done. When people say, I was so, like, I wasn't even surprised, but I was just kind of exhausted by it, actually, that there was a recent study, a recent poll done that said that 60% of people in the UK think that gender equality has gone too far. And I just feel like it feels like you're banging your head against a brick wall a lot of the time. And I wonder if instead of trying to drag people into it, it's about meeting them where they are and starting that conversation that then hopefully evolves.
Interesting that so many of the people who are trying and do have their eyes open spend so much time second guessing how much more they could do when there are people that aren't even thinking about it at all.
It's so true.
Like, I constantly am interrogating if I'm being open-minded enough, if I'm clued up enough.
Yes, completely.
But yet there are people, so many people in the world, that thought doesn't even pop into their head. And I'm not saying that to kind of give ourselves a pat on the back. I just think it's fascinating that we're finding this conversation so difficult because we don't want to say the wrong thing, because we don't want to come across as short-sighted, because we don't want to, you know, say something that's going to be taken out of context. Yet there are so many people, so many men on a global stage that could not give a shit how the context was taken.
No.
And they just simply don't care. And I don't know what my point is with that, but I just think, wow, what a world when a small group of people is so concerned by the optics of what they're trying to do and what they're trying to stand for and what they're trying to say, when it does feel like the vast majority have no consideration whatsoever. I think consideration is never a bad thing. I think so many of us should be more considerate of the things that we say and do. But I do think you're right that we can get ourselves into this cycle of, yeah, I'd rather go under the radar and not stand for anything than stand for the wrong thing or be shown up or be open to critique in some way. I think it's a really complicated relationship, and one that I think a lot of us have very complex feelings on. It's not just about being scared to get it wrong, it's being scared to open yourself up to a kind of vulnerability of I didn't know what to do in that situation. I didn't know how to make it better. It's almost like a hybrid of kind of overachieving and people pleasing, right?
Yes.
That you don't feel like you have the space to try and maybe get it wrong. You've got to get it right first time. And something that I struggle with a lot is being bad at things.
Yeah, completely.
To kind of take it to a slightly lighter place. Like I don't do things that I don't know that I'm good at.
Yeah.
And that's really sad because I cut myself off to so much.
Yeah.
And I really have to be forced to do things that I don't instantly know that I will succeed in.
Yes.
Even when there's no consequence. Like,
yes.
No one's grading me. You know, I went to Bali on my honeymoon and my husband and I took surfing lessons. First time either of us had surfed. He was immediately excellent because he's very sporty and, you know, one of those people that can just pick anything up instantly. I really struggled. I mean, no one cares. Do I need to be a good surfer? No. Am I being graded on it? Does it change who I am as a person? No. But I was so frustrated that I was not good at it because I feel like I often wonder if my career is, you know, because I'm interested in writing or because I'm good at it. Because, you know, to bring it back to gifted and talented, I was on the gifted and talented list for every subject besides maths because I'm terrible at it. So when I chose my GCSEs and I chose my A-levels and my degree, you know, I really pushed myself in a very artsy kind of humanities writing space.
Yep.
And, you know, it is what I love doing. But also, you know, I wonder if this schooling pattern of you drop the subjects that you're not good at. You know, like when you go from GCSE to A-level, you're basically told, take forward the subjects that you got the highest grades in.
Yep.
Not the ones that you're interested in.
Yes.
The ones you got the highest grades in. So I often wonder if my whole career and kind of, I guess, identity that's tied to being a writer comes not necessarily from my desire to write, but my aptitude for it.
Yeah.
And like, who could I be if I was naturally better at other things?
Completely. And I think, again, back to that language of gifted and talented, that is like, we succeeded with very little work that necessarily needed to be done. Like it wasn't, in an academic perspective, it was a natural aptitude for something that we didn't have to practice.
Yeah.
It wasn't really, really hard to, you know, and
it's
then
not going against the grain, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like maybe children who aren't as academic really, really, really have to study hard and practice and almost really force themselves to reach the grade that the system has decided is acceptable for you to be able to go on to whatever. And it is that thing, like you said, no one who, your husband as an example, is sporty.
Yeah.
So for him, naturally, because he spent his entire life doing sporty things, is going to pick that up quicker.
Yeah.
But because we've got that expectation on ourselves to be like,
why am I not good at it?
Why am I not good at this?
Yeah.
Because I've never done it before in my... And it puts that unfair...
Why should I be good at it?
Yeah.
But it's this,
unfair expectation.
on yourself to
completely
naturally pick something up.
Yeah.
I actually think that I don't know if this is correct. I feel like I heard they've gotten rid of gifted and talented lists. I feel like they don't exist anymore in schools.
I actually feel like that's a really good thing.
Yeah. Glad for it. Like I get what it's trying to do.
Yes.
I get that it's trying to reward kind of ambition at a really young age.
Yeah.
But having gone through and also, I don't know about you, like you're on this list and like maybe you'll have like an assembly once in a while, but like nothing ever actually happened.
No.
I feel like I went on like 1 or 2 workshops for like gifted and talented children, but it was just like this weird club that like you're part of, but nothing really happens. And
it's almost like this, I feel like it's almost like this thing that is actually about the other children more than it is you.
Yeah.
And I feel like you're almost put on this pedestal to make other people around you feel inadequate so that they should try harder to be like you.
And it's a state school thing, right? Like I went to a state school. I feel like they don't have it in private schools.
I mean, I don't actually know, but I'm this, yes, complete state school.
Like I can't think that they would, because the expectation is that everyone is gifted and talented.
Yes, because, and I think that is a fundamental difference between adults who are privately educated and those who went to state school, is that if you're privately educated, you have that level of confidence.
You feel comfortable in any situation, right?
Yeah.
Or in a lot more situations.
Because you've never been compared to anyone else.
Yeah.
You're you, and you've had great education, great access to education, and you've, like you said, everyone's gifted and talented. So it's not like, regardless of their grades, because just because you go to private school doesn't mean you're you know an academic. It just means that you're in a completely different environment, which is a really interesting way to look at it. And I think now in my own life, the people who did go to private school, the one thing that I would say is really glaring between the two of us is confidence.
Yeah.
Massively. And that's coming from people who grew up in, we were like the prime, like, lab rats for education.
Yeah.
We were everything that the education system...
You know, I was on the front of the prospectus that, you know, on parents' evening, they were like, Amy, do a speech about how, you know, like when the year sixes would come up and like look around the school to see if they were going to go there for secondary school. They'd be like, Amy, do a speech about how much you love being at this school and how this school has like molded you and shaped you, like wheeled out at every single opportunity. Very happily, might I add. But yeah, it's so much about being the kind of the poster child for aspiration.
Yeah. It's really difficult to then like find your place with it in the real world.
Yeah.
But for me, it's slightly different in the sense of I reached teenage years and I was like, fuck this, and just went the complete opposite way of, I'm not doing any of this. I'm not going to put my effort into anything anymore. I kind of like felt like I could feel I feel like manipulation is a bit of a strong word, but struggling to find another one, of like, this isn't accurate because this isn't how it actually is.
Yeah.
And also that pressure of, I want to be cool.
Yeah.
Which,
being gifted and talented is not cool.
Yeah, and then I feel it's just such a deep and complex subject because it's not cool. But why is intelligence not cool? Like, there's so many different rabbit holes that come off of this thing. And I just think not having it in the first place is such a good solution to that, because then it's just like everyone is on sort of that even playing field, and it's not necessarily about academic traits. It's about us as individuals.
Yeah.
That feels like...
And I think there's something, you know, you mentioned earlier about peaking early. I think something that I've really come to terms with is like, if I've been going at 100 for all of these years, like how long do I expect to have left?
Completely.
How, you know, if you give yourself one break, like even, you know, in my work now, if I let myself off for a couple of hours, or if I, you know, don't push myself to absolute max, I feel so guilty about that, because I feel like that goes against every bone in my body that says like, you're a striver, you're someone who goes above and beyond, you're someone who doesn't give up. Like, and I do wonder, you know, as I make certain decisions about starting a family and things like that, what is that going to do to my sense of someone who's only ever going in a straight line up?
Yes.
When it starts to go a little bit left, a little bit stagnant, a little bit kind of plateau, because I'm taking a year, 2 years, whatever out. And I think there's going to be a lot of unpicking for me to do of like, you know, when I come back into that environment, where do I stand?
Yes.
Because I've lost time.
Yes. And I think especially as women, we have like a really difficult time with that, because obviously we then are constantly told that our biological clock is ticking and we are only have a very kind of finite time to, if we want to be a mother, now's the time to do it, and everything else just has to wait. And it's just that toxic hustle culture of, if you're not sat at your desk, if you're not working all the hours under the sun, like you said, pushing yourself to burnout, you're not successful. But if you could go back and tell yourself one thing as gifted and talented Amy, if you could go back to her and just tell her one thing, what do you think it would be?
This is going to sound incredibly kind of defeatist, but I think it's something as simple as like getting the things you want won't make you happy. Because I have my dream job and I love my work, I really do, but so much of the value in my life doesn't come from that. And I think I truly wouldn't have believed when it is such a tick box exercise of, well, if I do this, I'll be this. If I do this, people will think I'm super impressive. I think that, yeah, I would try and detach my self-worth from my achievement a little bit earlier if I could. I don't know if I can. I genuinely don't know if that's something that someone like me is able to ever properly do. I would love to like get something wrong and that not ruin my day.
Yeah.
But it does. And, you know, I joked when I did this newsletter, like, I promise I am in therapy for this. But like, it is something that I work on. I try so hard to work on, to be like, just because you didn't do something, like, that's okay. And I could not honestly tell you if that's true, but I think I would try a little bit earlier to detach myself and to realize that there is so much more that I should want that isn't just career and ambition based.
Yeah. And I think as well, what's really come through to me is about trying less and being okay with that, because even just like you just said then, like trying to try
Lifelong
like,
try hard.
it's just yeah, and I think that there is just something in us just saying it's actually okay to not try so hard all the time, and just finding a place of comfort within ourselves, of,
or even just being okay with it being a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, we're okay
like,
as we and I think that is that real thing about comes back to just being comfortable in our own skin.
Yeah.
Despite everything, all the conditioning, all society, you know, media representation, everything is just being comfortable in our own skin and not feeling like we constantly are in this pursuit of trying to be something we're not, something better than we are.
Yeah.
And just being okay with us exactly as we are in our form.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lovely place to leave such a powerful episode. I have thoroughly enjoyed learning from you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You
it's
are
been such a pleasure.
You're so welcome. You are such a powerhouse, and there's so much that we can all learn from having conversations with each other. So thank you for having the conversation with me today.
Thank you so much.